So I took this from Yukio did something, I think, at the CFSP council, and it was sheep. But we thought maybe just continuing on the whole idea of a scale of animals. So this is right now, right, on this cat scale. How are you feeling? And you can share or you don't have to share right now at this moment, at this time. I think I'm a 5 right now. Jane, what do you think you are? I think you found your cat there.
Yeah, I put myself down as a 5 because I'm feeling overwhelmed right now, but I think Christine is hysterical that she's afraid of the 8. And 2 of you are a combo of 8 and 9, so that's even scarier.
Right. How will the meeting go, right? I'm not, at least, does anybody have, I can't see my chat right now. Did anybody put a 2?
I don't see any.
Okay, so that bodes well for us, right? So that bodes well for our meeting today. So I'll just kind of move on. Thank you. In terms of just kind of checking in. I want to thank everyone for the time. We're going to try and be as absolutely as efficient as possible. It's really good to see everyone here. And I'm just going to share the agenda now. And then, so I think that first, what we had talked about each time is to have our partners just share, not necessarily all the stuff that you're doing, but just a few things. Particularly, I'm thinking new opportunities that we can link. We've had several conversations about what's coming up and how we can begin to really share the best work that we're doing as partners. So I'll give people a few minutes to do that. And the next piece is to Anne and Yukio and Francisco, and Christine was also involved, really how to take a look at some of the value statements. Melvet, he'll let us in a pretty good exercise, I think, in terms of kind of identifying some of the values that we felt were important for our work, for our CFSP Council, and our work on behalf of family engagement. And then the next piece will really we'll look at some of the long goals and the buckets that we have, which were capacity building with school districts, with families, and then the resource hub, our website in terms of building and extending that website. So I'm going to just stop for a second and then just ask partners if you have something that you'd like to kind of share as either an exciting opportunity for us or a place to link. Could we do that?
You want to volunteer?
Yeah. Jane,
okay.
Volunteer, there you go.
I'm always willing to volunteer. So I don't even know where to begin. We're doing so many things. It seems as though the start of the year, everything blew up. And Anne, maybe you'll share some of the stuff you and Beth are talking about doing, since you know better what it is. So Anne will share one thing that we're going to do when it's her turn. But some of the other things we're doing right now is we have a real increase in youth work, and we're hiring a youth coordinator, which is really exciting, to do youth panels. We have a youth advisory board. We don't have one, but we work with the youth advisory board. So we're going to be really boosting up our youth work, which is exciting for us. As far as intersecting work, Betsy, if that's really what you're looking for, something that's happening in the state, and I don't know if everybody here is aware, is the release of the Sparkler app. And I don't know if you're familiar with this, but Betsy's nodding, she knows. The Sparkler app is going to be an app about developmental milestones, right? And monitoring children. And the state has spread it is working on getting every district to post it to their website so that parents start early on monitoring their children. And it's really, they're trying to blanket everywhere. We just did a training yesterday with librarians who want to put it on their websites too. CPAC will have it on our website. It's really it's a very early childhood thing, birth to I don't know about the app might go to 5. I'm not certain about that. But it's really an opportunity to do parent engagement.
It's
And
a great thing. Thank you, Jane. And you know what? That's what our Friday cafe was last Friday about Sparklet.
that's right. Andrea went to talk about it, right? That's right.
Yeah. And it was just fabulous. And we got a lot of good feedback, and they loved it because it's something very concrete. So thank you, Jane.
So the goal, for those of you who don't know, is for parents to be able to find any warning signs, follow their child's development. It's a little different than ages and stages. And once they're into the app, it has all kinds of things that will help them track their children's medical history and all kinds of things. So the goal is, I just don't know enough about it to speak to intelligently, but I think it's an opportunity we can all kind of overlap on.
Agree. Thank you, Jane.
So I think Jane laid the introduction for me to go next. And so let me start by talking about the project that Beth Reel from CPAC and I are working on, which is to do a series of videos together where we are answering questions for parents around IDEA processes, protections, and guidance. So we will be meeting again. I think we're meeting again next week, and then we will start. We're going to start doing these videos. So I don't know how that's going to turn out. I think we have to have a few sessions to do revisions, but it's kind of really exciting. I'm looking forward to it in that it's a great resource that we'll be able to provide to families, but I look at it also as an excellent example of cooperation and collaboration across partners. So we're really excited about that opportunity. At AFCamp, we are really thrilled that our youth convening planning work has progressed. We have a team assembled, and we have a meeting scheduled, and I believe I did see Vincent included you, Dave, as you requested. So, and we've had some follow-up meetings with Dave around how we're going to move forward. He's going to be assisting with development of surveys and really just helping us to be able to document how the project with the youth convening is going. So we're excited that that has finally launched. So I think that's the major things that I would want to share with the group at this time.
Great. Thanks, Ann. Thanks, Ann.
So I can go next, and I have my colleague Nixa Diaz as well, just in case that she can jump in with some of the exciting things she's doing. But one of the pieces that I would like to highlight, some of the work that we're doing, and Nixa is very integral in all this effort, that are working very close with our colleague at the State Department of Education, Dr. Gladys Lavas, and doing sessions completely in Spanish for families. So there we have scheduled 5 sessions that it will going to be no translator necessary. All the sessions are going to be completely in Spanish. So that is very exciting. And the other piece that I also wanted to share with all of you, and Nisa, I don't know if you can hear me, but for you to jump in here as well. The work that we are going to be doing with faith leaders. Sessions specifically designed for faith leaders, or how to engage families in. And this is actually a lot of things that's going to happen actually the weekends, Sundays. So this is going to be working with them and making sure that they are spreading the message with their communities. So I want to highlight those 2 pieces. Nitsa, would you like to add?
Sure. Can you guys hear me? It's just that I'm waiting for my son to pick him up.
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
So I think Betsy and I and Dave met, and we talked about the faith-based leaders. We are the presenter who's working with us. They do something called Education Sunday. So they're working with the faith-based community to truly understand what that looks like, what education is, and how they would see this happening in their, in their places of worship, or also having a pledge, for example, when parent-teacher conference night comes up, that if they might not need to have a service that day, that they send the parents to go meet with the teacher, and this is done very intentional. So, or like they also help them create like prizes for the students who get good grades, you know, and things like that, and incentives, so that the leaders can announce all of these things from the pulpit for what, you know, for whatever place of worship they choose to go to. So it's really exciting to see how this is working together. We had a schedule, but the presenter got sick. You know why? We're in a pandemic, so we are back on board for March. So this is truly exciting for me because I like to see how this works around the state.
Thank you, Nitsa. Another piece that I also wanted to add in is some of the things that we've been pretty busy at CERC, and we need to make sure that we begin to make those connections with the work of this grant, is the work on the curriculum for the African American, Black, Latino, and Puerto Rican studies that was approved by the board. The levels of communication that is going to be needed for families, you know, just there is levels here. The first one, you know, for educators, and now how do we make sure that the messaging goes to the families in a way that they understand the importance of this curriculum for all students? So, you know, my wheels are turning and being able to link this to the work of this particular grant and partnership and collaboration. So I just wanted to bring that forward because it's been high on our agenda and high on the agenda of the state as well. So just want to make sure that we make some links here moving forward. Well, thank you. That's all I have.
Ingrid, that's a great connection when we think about this work. It fits a whole lot of pieces, right? It does that whole links to learning as far as the home, and it also talks about, you know, equity and inclusion. So that would be a perfect strategy for us to work together on as well. I like that. Judy, are you there?
I am here.
Oh, there she is.
Yeah, so if you haven't heard, let me just update you on something that recently went out to superintendents. And that's information on the new funds that are coming from the federal government, from the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, otherwise known as ESSER. And this is ESSER 2. We had ESSER 1 a few months ago. That was the first influx of funding. Now we have ESSER 2, and this will be rolling out to districts. I guess in the next few months, they'll have to put in a plan for their work, and so they're doing their plans now. And I'll find a link to this and put it in the chat box. But the state level priorities, there are 4. There's academic supports for learning loss. There's school safety and social emotional well-being. There's remote learning and staff development. And there's also family and community connections. So that is something districts will be working with. And so one of the things that we need to be telling people who are involved in family engagement is to find out who in their district is making these decisions, and to be talking with them about how some of these funds can be used for family engagement. And it is a good chunk of money. Districts are getting really significant funding. The problem is it really has to be spent in 2 years. And so they'll just have to be thoughtful about how they put supports in place that they'll be able to sustain after this money goes away. But it is flowing right now. So I'm looking at it right now, but I'll find a link so that you can see the full write-up on everything.
Judy, do you know anything about the parameters of the money? For example, could people say, I only want to spend it on the first 3 and I don't want to do the 4th thing? Or do you know anything about like the expectations for reporting on what they've actually spent their money on?
I don't know about the expectations for reporting. And they will be able to select within the priorities how they want to focus their funding.
Okay, so they aren't necessarily going to choose the fourth bucket.
Well, and actually, you know, I read it in a way to add to the suspense, but surprisingly, Family and Community Connections is the second bucket. I was shocked. Usually it's always the last of the four.
Always.
Yeah,
right.
so that's good news.
And so Judy, is this something that you can share with your Friday Cafe list?
Yes, yes, that is a great idea.
So, so not only the list, but maybe really wonderful ways to spend your money to give people kind of an idea of how they might be doing high impact family engagement would be a benefit to people too.
So I have a couple of thoughts. So one of them is this something that we can alert the advisory council to, so that where they have opportunities to advocate for the use of those funds in their respective districts, we can tie that back to our family engagement project. And the second is just that for us as organizations, with our connections, we need to make sure that we are reaching out and asking our districts how are they planning to avail themselves of the ESSERS 2 money, and how are they including and incorporating families and youth in that decision-making process.
So Betsy, are you going to do a CREC overview? Because I'm curious about the 5 districts we started with, and to know where we are with those and if we're growing them at all, or?
I think it's in part of the stuff that we'll be doing, and Donna is here. So Donna Marino is actually here. So I think it's in part of that capacity building with the schools that we talked about. So it's on our radar as far as building. Is that okay that we wait for that for a bit, Jane?
Absolutely, yeah.
Good. So you know what I want to do? I want to kind of move forward, if that's okay, because I know that, again, Ann and Yukio and Francisco really did a lot of work around values and some of the stuff that we talked about. And I want them to be able to present for a few minutes. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing, and I will turn my capacity over to Ann and Yukio.
Great, thank you. All right, then let me share my screen so you guys can see the values. So after the last meeting, Christine sent out some survey for people to fill out about their values, and trying to get a little bit more information out from the leadership council. And Anne and I, with the help of Francisco, tried to kind of condense things down and pull out some major themes. And so we landed with 3 ultimately. And just take a deep breath, think about the mission and vision, all the work that's been happening, and what we could do potentially in the future, and all those things in mind. Here are the values that we landed on. All right, so value number 1 is student growth. Keep improvement of students' academic outcomes and social emotional growth at the center of our family engagement efforts. Because at the end of the day, we do family engagement so that students, right, can flourish and get access to the supports they need, or really be successful in whatever environment that they are in, not only academically, but also social, emotional, growth-wise too. And so students, we always need to keep them at the center of everything that we do. And some of the other values, right, that are nested in this is about strength-based and making sure that we have high impact strategies. And we're also always trying to have new ways of ensuring that our kids are getting what they need in their school environment. So that is value number one. And, you know, we can hold off on questions for now, and we can go through all the values and see where everyone lands. But so we'll hold off, all right, for the other questions and stuff. Value two is equity. When the survey came back from Christine, racial equity was like at the top of the list. And I don't know if this is like the, if you build it, you know, they will come kind of a thing. And if we name it, you know, then we will work up to it, because right now I don't know that racial equity is necessarily at the forefront of the services and what we're discussing right now. But, you know, but everyone, not everyone, but, you know, but a lot of people put racial equity at the top of the list of what they value. And so address systemic barriers to positive student growth using family engagement resources and tools to promote policies and practices that advance racial and educational equity. And again, you know, a lot of this about racial equity, about educational equity, you know, a lot of the work that needs to go into that is about building that trust and respect and relationship with people and families and students. And that we really do need to make that commitment to do so, because it's not easy. And it's an ongoing thing, persistence, you know, we need to just continuously work at it, and making sure that, you know, our equity value, right, like really reflects that it's not enough to just have the diversity. Again, like we really need to bring people on board and bring people to a place where they feel comfortable working together and including them in decision making and stuff. So that's the second value. And then I'm going to hand it over to Anne, who will do the last value.
Thank you, Yukio. And our third value is partnership. Build collaborative partnerships with families, schools, and communities to learn from the diverse experiences and expertise that are critical to collective accomplishment of our shared goals. So while we were examining the results from the breakout groups, the surveys that Christine did, the nested values that spoke around respect, being high impact, building relationships, the mutual trust and the commitment were things that really rose to the top. So when we look at partnership, we felt that it really included many of the individual values that came to the surface. So our approach, as you can see from both the two values that Yukio has already shared with you, as well as this partnership one, was to try to come up with values, value statements that reflected the nested values, even if it didn't necessarily incorporate the words themselves. And so we looked at the partnership one, and we think that to build the collaborative partnerships that are really going to help to drive collective accomplishment and identified shared goals that everybody can be invested in, all of these nested values are reflected in that. If we do this well and build a collaborative partnership, it will incorporate in some way, at some degree, all of the nested values that are shown: strengths-based, parent voice, leadership, innovation, recognition of partner talents, high impact strategies, commitment. I want to say mutual trust and respect, though it's down. We heard a lot of that in everything that we took a look at. It's very, very important. And persistence, because any of this work that we're doing on any of these three stated values and anything else is going to require us to be able to hold fast to what our goals and visions are for our CFSP work and inclusion. So with that, I will toss it back to Yukio, and we're happy to entertain any questions or and welcome any comments from the group. I'm
Great,
sorry,
thank
one
you.
other thing I would just like to say, hats off to my colleague, Yukio, and thank you to Francisco for his support in getting us to this point.
Great. Thank you, Anne. Yeah, we had a lot of help from everyone here in the leadership, as well as at the last advisory council where we, again, shared the mission and vision and tried to get feedback from our parent advisory council members and other stakeholder advisory council members as to what are the values that they really, hold dear in doing this and being a part of this grant. So, those are the three that we landed on. I don't know that we need more. I feel like we were able to nest a lot of things under each of the values. But, if you have any questions, now's the time. If you have feedback and, there's like glaring things that you're like, this is not us, then I would love to know so that we can kind of just, get this down.
We're
Well,
also getting some feedback in the chat.
Oh, great.
yeah,
And
no, I was just going to echo what everyone said in the chat. I think, to me, I'm thinking in terms of the evaluation, like when I think of future evaluation reports, looking at it with a lens of these three values, I think for the team, like I can share the data, but then when you think about how are we doing when we think about, equity, growth, I mean, that's a terrific, it's just a great framework. I'm amazed how you were able to take all the things that we saw in that Padlet and turn it into three really overarching, values. That's, so I'm just going to echo what other folks said in the chat.
Great, thank you. I think the one that we went back and forth on was the equity one, because it's, I don't know that we have necessarily like directly addressed systemic barriers yet. And I don't know, moving forward, how, if this is our value, then what are we doing to reflect that value in like the direct services or training or, onboarding of new advisory members? Like how are we really going to put this in practice, I guess, is a question that I had for us.
I was going to first, this is just to see what you were able to do, just wonderful. I love the concept of the nested values. It's just those themes that are associated with what you have addressed as the value. I had a question about the equity value. It's addressed as address systemic barriers, and I heard you say something more about being very explicit. So what I will ask the group is, what are we defining as systemic barriers? If we go back to the value, because a systemic barrier can be funding. Is that what are we talking about, systemic barrier? So it's almost like being very explicit. Is that are we trying to address the systems of oppression that have created barrier for our, just like, what is it that we are trying to define? Is it that we're trying to address systemic racism, that it has created some of the barriers? So if we want to name it, is that what we want to name? So I just want to ask, how direct we want to be. I'm just putting it in the space for us to consider, rather than, systemic. A lot of things are systemic, and for a lot of people, those systemic things do not cause barriers. They cause access and opportunity. So, I just want to just put it in this space and just commend you for the amazing work that you have done, because it just, I know how working to put in all the stuff together, but it's just great. I just have that some thoughts regarding that particular one.
I just wanted to jump in because I love the value of equity. It was the more explicit sentence below it that I think Ingrid's also getting to. You use the term racial equity and educational equity. So I think that explicit word that Ingrid just brought in is a question for me, because my stakeholder group are kids with disabilities, right? And families of kids with disabilities. So equity has a different meaning when you're thinking about disability than you're thinking about race. Both are important, and I want to make sure both are that we're inclusive of. And so I think, how explicit do we really want to get with our equity lens? I think having an equity lens is really important. And Yukio, one thing I wanted to say with your, like, have we really gotten there yet? I look at some of our equity work, just like Ingrid was just saying, she's doing training for families in Spanish, not with a translator. That is removing a barrier. And so that is one example of something that might be that our partners are doing to be more equitable.
And
Great,
I'm
thank
thinking
you.
about your your website, like, it just makes so much sense to have like a link with the systemic barriers, where you could have the details, so you don't have it in the, you don't want to make it really long, because that could be a very long piece, but you can imagine something where you build over time, more details. So yeah.
I just want to say thank you to Yukio and Anne for putting these values together. And in the area of equity, I know being from Middletown, I bring this up a lot, but we have been doing a lot of work with CERC around equity, and some pretty powerful and very uncomfortable work for me, but I keep at it. And so I, when I talk about that, I have referred back to CERC that, and so Ingrid and Anissa, if, I think I'd like to see that to be more part of the state level work, especially for the, for the alliance districts. And when I look at that grouping under equity, the word that really comes to me, speaks strongly to me, is trust. And I might want to add relationships there. And so I know when we talk about equity, should we be more specific about racial equity? Because I think some of our conversations have gone there, but I also know that, families with children with disability, there's equity there also. So maybe we need to be more specific in those two areas, so that, we're not glazing over what we really mean. Because when we have conversations in our different breakout groups or subcommittees, I think we do get a little deeper, and now is the time that we do need to go deeper. So and I want to thank CERC for the help they've given us in Middletown, because it's not easy, but yet it does need to be addressed. And this is a time, I mean, when you talk family engagement, we just can't talk it generically, and that famous word we had out there, hard to reach. We know that's not really true. It's more that, we need to go to them, and we need those practices, that, we need help. Every community needs help to kind of look at it in a different way. I mean, honestly, I just had a meeting with my principals, and someone said that term, and I was like so upset. I was like, oh my God, no, we're the ones that are hard to reach, not the parents. So we still need to do that work. Thank you.
If I could, Yukio, I wanted to address something that Jane just put in the chat. And that is in regards to when we first were drafting this, there was that kind of ticker tape laundry list of particular communities or populations of people that face challenges with inequities, right? And systemic barriers, as Ingrid put to us. So we did list, families of children with disabilities, language access barrier, et cetera, financial barriers. We did list that as when we were first kind of chomping through it, as Yukio stated at the beginning. So I'm really glad to hear you all, that your voices be heard on this. I think it speaks to how important it is to people.
Right. And I think, you know, and maybe this is where we need like common, you know, like a list of glossary, right? Like, what does educational equity mean for everyone, right? Because for me, educational equity is, you know, about making sure that all the kids, no matter what their identity, no matter what their, you know, barriers, no matter what, like everyone gets a just outcome, right? Like for me, that's where is understood that that's where we fall. But you know, in looking at nationally and even in Connecticut, right, like education is a white space. It's a very white space, and I think we really need to name that race piece. In that, you know, when I look at even special ed, right, when I look at the special ed data, I'm like, where are the Asian kids? Like, why aren't they being identified and you know, getting tested and, you know, getting the services that they desperately need? Why
They're too
is
smart,
that?
Yukio. They're too
Right?
smart.
So that's why, like, for me, like racial justice and educational justice, I think we also need the racial justice to be able to get to the educational justice. And so I think that's where, you know, we kind of landed in taking out all the laundry list of identities and marginalizations, because it could be like this huge paragraph, right? But so I think if we have a common the vocabulary list that we are working off of, I think this could work. But I am open to change and input to make this better, because you know, for a lot of the advisory council members too, this equity piece, you know, whether it's racial equity or educational equity, was pretty high on the list. So, you know, we wanted to address both and how they both work together to make sure that kids have just outcomes. So
It's such a it's such a central and essential discourse that we have in right now, because this is what happens when we assert the value, and we all see the value differently, interpreted based through our lens. That's what happens now. You know, it's just like, so it's like, how do we all define all those things that we are naming as the equity or the system or those the systemic barriers? So by developing the list to ourselves, to your point regarding a glossary, so that is attached to the values. You don't have to write it in the value because it will become pages. But that we engage in a conversation that says exactly, because the concept of equity, it changes with time. That those identities. Right now, we are so focused on racial equity because of the time. We are so focused on language equity because of the time. We are so focused on access, abilities because of the time. We have to start thinking about it that way. And how do we define it? So when somebody asks, so because somebody's going to challenge it, as you know, somebody's going to question, what do you mean by systemic barriers? So we need to be able to speak to that and have the language. So that idea of a glossary of terms, how it's defined, it is a great way to really address this. So it is respectful, as those nested items, is respectful of everyone's perspective when it's being engaged. But then we can be very explicit within those definitely dimensions of equity that we want to address.
Yukio, does it make sense to you, and Anne, also I'm asking you too, does it make sense to you too to have maybe a couple other folks take that particular one and maybe do some wordsmithing or tweaking at it and bring it back to get a fresh, you know, 2 sets of eyes on it, and then bring it back? What do you two propose we do with that particular one? Because this is all a bunch of great insight. But to me, in my mind, I don't think we've resolved particularly the sticking point that people were addressing. So Anne and Yukio, what do you two propose we do to move it forward?
does the State Department of Ed have like a list of terms for like all districts to be using? It would be a nice unified thing to have.
Not that I've seen. I think we would probably pick up the phone and call Ingrid.
Right. And Ingrid, I know you work with a lot of districts and, you know, in the, and so if you have a list of, you know, terminology, and maybe we can work off of that as we are defining things so that, you know, you as a partner organization, you know, can share and we work off of that same list. And yeah, I think it would, and I don't know how you feel, but it would be good to have like a fresh set of eyes too.
Well, sure. I mean, I think 2 out of 3 with just one that we need to go back and work on. I think we'll take that. But I think I would want to also just encourage us to, I'm concerned about the lists piece because it's very difficult to be, if you leave somebody out, you know, you just can't be all inclusive. So I would encourage us though, I think, to just kind of take a look at it again. And I think having someone else, you know, having other folks take a look at it to see how it might be tweaked. But I'd like an opportunity to just kind of share a little bit of from the thinking of how we got here and how this might play out. I think that one of the things that I've heard that I think is really key for us is, you know, Ingrid said something about like it shifts. So I think when we're making the statement, we want to make sure that it is flexible enough so that it can be applicable across our work for the remainder of this grant cycle. But then also a key element in our application was that it's going to create something that's sustainable even past the time of this particular grant. How are we going to change the way our family engagement occurs into the future? So not just for this 2-year period. So, you know, just kind of thinking that the definition of systemic barriers, I think is important for us to kind of go to the next clause as well. Systemic barriers to positive student growth. And, you know, that is something that can be defined differently across the different districts and even within different schools within the districts. We're using our family engagement resources and tools to promote policies that advance it. I think it's going to look different. And so I would just encourage that. But I think that if we can have other folks take a look at that and try to capture some of the concerns that have been expressed today, that would be very helpful, because you know, this is a sounding board. Bringing it to you guys is a sounding board, and what we hear from you is probably reflective of what we would hear from a broader group.
So, Anne, thank you so much for that. I think that just thinking about the process. So I can offer a tweak to the language that might not bring us to, that we don't have to develop a summary or definitions. So if we were to, rather than address, if we were to change that to challenge, all systems of oppression that create barriers to students. So we're talking about, we're going to challenge all those systems of oppression. And now all those systems become flexible because it is language, ability, it is race, it is, so you're talking about all, and we're saying we're positioning ourselves to challenge them, not just address them, challenge them. And I think that that creates that flexibility and momentum. So just something, you know, I offer my, you know, to provide some language, but rather than recreate what you already have created, just tweaking a little bit, that will create enhance the focus of what we're engaging in the conversation now.
Ingrid, I really like what you're talking about as far as that challenge piece, because I think it also gives us some language. So that instead of kind of being observers when we talk about challenging, if we collectively, right, if we collectively kind of agree to the terminology, then we're agreeing also that when we see something, we talk about something and that we do challenge it. And that's a very active stance. And so I think that's a great recommendation.
I have a question, and I had to step out and take a call. I'm sorry, so I may have missed this. One of the things I'm thinking about in this conversation is from whose perspective. And so I'm thinking about what the families perceive as barriers, and to be led by the family's experiences and the family's voice as a way to incorporate. We're challenging on behalf of families. So this group, this project is not in charge of identifying barriers so much as learning and listening to families, putting families and their children at the center, and understanding barriers from their perspective. So that's just something that I'm thinking about a lot in my own work, is who decides. And so there are, and as someone said, the barriers in different schools and different communities at different ages. The barriers, the systemic barriers do shift. And just incorporating that family's voice and centering the family and the child. I'm not sure if that made sense, but that's a perspective I've been working with.
Maybe I just want to make sure that I'm understanding. I mean, I hear what both Ingrid and Judy are saying around like how things shift, but I'm also thinking, well, I think that there hasn't been a time in this country when racial equity hasn't been an issue, when kids with special needs have gotten equitable services, when we haven't had, issues around language equity. So I do think while there's, some sort of shifts in the details, that these are actually, foundational to our, educational system. And so I don't know that without, kind of naming them and addressing them directly, that we're not going to, kind of just, do what everyone else does and sort of talk about things and, move on to the next initiative or point of discussion. So
I guess I would say yes, totally agree, makes sense. But there's still room for, I think, to understand families' experiences, and at different times and in different communities, there are different needs. And to just understand it's not a one size fits all. And the perspectives of the people that are living the experience.
So I'm wondering if it helps us to get to where we might want to go. We started out with the addressing systemic barriers, but what if we started out with the through family engagement resources and tools, which is sort of speaking to this piece of that's where it needs to start. And I think along the lines of what I'm hearing, or something that I heard from you, Judy, and it's like, I don't see it so much as on behalf of families, but I see it families being at the lead, okay, of that work. So maybe if we can have some kind of reordering and rewording that is really focusing on, we're using family engagement resources and tools to then, identify or address. I know identify was thought of at one point. We took it out because that's not really what our project is about. But I do think that maybe if we still incorporate the addressing systemic barriers, but it's tied to being a barrier to student growth, and education advocacy lends itself to being defined according to that individual student, that individual school, that individual district. And so for one student, it might be racial, but for another student, it might be disability. For another, it might be language. For another, it could just be the lack of adequate funding. So I think that might be one approach, but at this point, I think there's value to somehow enlisting others to tweak that, and I'm fine with that. I think I'm seeing you, Keo, shake her head as well. So Francisco's question was, how do we move it forward? My suggestion is a couple of people volunteer to try and pull together something that tweaks what we had, because it didn't sound like it was to be tossed, and come back and let's see what some other eyes can come up with to incorporate some of the great stuff that we've heard this afternoon.
And thank you for sharing what you just made me, the way you framed it just now made me realize is the paradigm, the difference is doing something for families or doing something with families. And I think our whole mandate is to do as much as possible with families, not on their behalf. And I think that addresses. So thanks for framing that way, Anne.
One of the, yes, thank you, Anne. Just to put a bow on what I was trying to say, not very eloquently, but one of the concepts I've been working with is the idea of co-constructing with families. And there's some incredible work going on out on the West Coast where they're really developing methods, authentic methods of doing this. And so I would commit to possibly thinking about a sentence or a few words that capture that idea around with, not to, and the concept of co-constructing with families. If that's, so I know I'm rattling on about it, but if that's something that's also on other people's minds, I would be happy to try to put that in a few words.
Judy, I kind of appreciate that, because I think that speaks to that whole idea of partnership too. So I keep thinking about, this whole idea of challenge and barriers, but I know that if we don't address both sides of the equation, right, whether it's family advocacy and voice, that side of the equation, and then look at the schools and that side of the equation, that we're never, that we're still always at odds in some way. So that's the piece that I'm also interested in, is that whole idea of partnerships to really address and really give equal weight as we move forward too. Wow.
Who wants to work on this some more?
Okay, now
don't all volunteer at once.
It seems like we can do it via email.
That's really good.
I think we could do it via email.
Yes, we can do things over email and Google Docs and all that
So
stuff.
I'm happy to help in that regard. Yeah.
Me too. I just wanted to add, Yukio, that we have been listening to families from the equity perspective at CERC for quite a bit of, spent a lot of time with them. So last weekend, Ingrid just got the titles. We were very intentional with the equity sessions we're running in the spring, and having one only on affinity about Black and African American families, so they can have their space to come and share with us. Well, I'm not going to be there, but share with each other what it is they need. And so we realized that by doing that is going to help us truly know what's going on out there, because we think we know, but do we really know? We just hear somebody saying, well, they don't have access to technology. Well, that's not the issue. The issue is now that they have the access, but they don't know how to use it or access it. So how do we make it better for all of us? So we have been very intentional, really thinking through how do we use what they're saying to truly help all of us be better advocates for our kids. And that one is running in April for
Thank you. And
African American families.
And you know, and any of those workshops, if there's a place for that, can be shared out. I'm happy to share it with other families too. And yeah, all right. So Jane and Donna. Oh, and Ingrid, yay! I'm assuming your raising hand is that you want to work on that. Yes. All right, then I will. Thank you. All right. Then we will start an email chain again.
If it makes, whoops, where am I? If it makes sense, do we want to make sure, because it's such an important topic, do we want to make sure that it's part of our agenda in terms of discussing and getting to different points? I know that we want to kind of finish this work, but it sounds like there's a lot of discussion in terms of once we actually have the terms or the terminology or the new value. Do we want to set a little bit of time to discuss and to kind of share at our leadership meetings? So that's ongoing kind of practice, I think.
Can I ask you something else, Betsy? I didn't go to the advisory council meeting this past time, so I was hoping you could put that on the agenda every leadership to talk about what happened and how it went and what's happening next time.
Sure. We're still in the planning process, but we got, certainly Dave can send the evaluations and the participants, and we can talk about the advisory council meeting, sure.
He does, I mean, I did receive them. That's one of the things that prompted some questions I had, but it really wasn't anywhere on the agenda to discuss. So I thought maybe that could be a regular agenda item.
Sure, we could do that.
Thanks.
Sure. And maybe, and perhaps, I mean, I think the best part would be for, our co-chairs, really. I don't need to report on that, but our co-chairs, I guess I'm voluntold you again, right? Yukio and Donna really are our chairs of the advisory. And so I think that as we kind of progress, I mean, I don't need to leave these meetings every single time. I would love for people to want to take them over and to kind of set the agenda. I'll do a lot of the work behind the scenes, but it sounds like I love this idea of partnership and kind of taking on different kinds of responsibility. There is so much talent in these little squares that we're looking at that I think we could share this even more. I appreciate it.
Well, I think about what Judy said, and we aren't doing this on behalf of parents, right? We're doing it with parents. The co-creation is a wonderful model. I don't know what the advisory council has told us so far. Like, I don't know that they've given us any feedback on our work. I'm not really 100% sure of their role, but because we have one, I feel like Donna and Yukio should have their voice at this table or something in writing from them or something that they're saying what they think. Because I haven't really heard from the families on the advisory or the stakeholder group as a whole. You know what I mean? So I just feel like I'd love to hear what they have to say. And I've been to a couple meetings and I didn't really hear it there either. So I don't know if there's a mechanism from the groups that are broken out or what's happening to have an understanding, to give feedback to our work so that we modify or, take a different direction if needed.
Yeah, I agree, Jane, that, last February, right, was like the first parent advisory council meeting before things shut down. And it's been a full year. And I feel like we are really underutilizing and not necessarily really modeling what family engagement needs to look like, even within this CFSP, in that we just ask them to come to meetings, but we haven't gotten input from them. We don't have anything as a leadership to bring to them to advise on as an advisory council. We're, at the last meeting, we did do the, let's look at the mission and vision and get input about values, but but that's been it. We, there's so many parents that are ready. They came to this space ready to really, either bring back stuff to their districts or give their experiences as parents on the receiving end of services or whatever it is that brought the parents and families here. But we haven't used them in a way that really models that partnership or their expertise. And it's been a year, and I think this first year we said that the family advisory council members are a 2-year position, but for this first year they have the option after year 1, so that we don't lose everyone all at once, and to stagger. And we noticed, and Donna brought it up last time, was like, it seemed like a pretty low number of turnout. Where are they? Do they know that their term is up, or do they not want to re-up? Like, we need to figure out ways of why they're not coming. And, how do we get the information out to the families again that, that this is a position for 2 years. If you miss 2 meetings, like, you got to let us know. Like, if there's, a reason for you to resign, let us know, and we can try to find, new members and be deliberate in like which communities to reach out to. So as a family member in this space, really excited about family engagement. I feel like, yes, I am in the part of the planning and I get to sit in on these meetings, but I still haven't really seen the full potential of it. And the innovation working groups, we are asking families to come together to do innovation working groups, but there is no guarantee that whatever we are discussing or proposing is what's necessarily going to be taken up by any of the partner organizations to be implemented. And that seems like a waste of family time.
I think that piece was that, that those innovation working groups, the things that they're proposing will be brought to leadership to implement. So that was not the intention, and if that's a miscommunication, we certainly need to go back. But the intention was really for people to come up with, we asked people, I'm trying to explain this up. We asked people to come up with woodworking ideas, and I know that people have been working, and then bring those ideas to leadership. And those ideas were planned based on what leadership decides to be implemented. Now, it depends on, of course, the budget kind of stuff, but there is a plan to be able to do that with you. And maybe we need to communicate that in a better way. And then go back to like all this planning, and the work that we're doing. I agree, it needs to go back to the advisory council. And so, how we do that in the best way. So
that sounds like we need to figure out that communication pathway between the advisory council and the leadership, so that advisory council knows what is being done, and then they can comment on that and maybe say, well, this should be being done and nobody's talking about that,
Right, yeah, so that's space, absolutely.
I just had to say that, like, so at the advisory meetings, it seems like parents are wanting to know what the leadership team is doing, and at the leadership team, we're trying to find out what the advisory team, and they're all, and I've been in a lot of those circles, and they're all doing really great work, but we need that linkage, and I really feel it's starting to head in that direction. Because of COVID, we had that breakdown of time. And I do feel that, I think from the parent advisory piece, they're like, what are those 5, they really are always saying, what are the 5 districts doing? And what are those partners really doing? So they keep asking that. And then it seems like in this space, it's, the same question. So how can we, join our efforts? But I think it's within like a couple months, it's going to be all pulled together. But we might have to give each keep each area their space for a little bit, because I know working from the work group that I'm also in, you know, we're kind of wrapping up what we've done. So, but it does take time, and honestly, especially Francisco and I were having that discussion. You know, when you're working with parents, you really want to make sure you give them that time to process, and that sometimes takes a while. And so it feels, and I get frustrated because I'm a do, you know, I want to get something done, but we have to give families, when you're working with families, you have to give them that time to process. And I kind of think that's what's happening, you know, like when groups come together, that whole thing, what is it, storming, and, you know, that whole scenario. I forget the rest of it.
Forming, norming, storming. Forming,
but-
norming, storming.
Yes, thank you. So we're in that process now, which is a good thing.
So let us, and I was going to ask for recommendations for our next leadership meeting. So this sounds like this is a good discussion for our next leadership meeting, as far as advisory council. We'll have a little more information for people. And I know that we have a planning, you know, there was a planning group. So Yukio and Donna certainly are on, have been doing some of the planning myself around advisory council meetings, but we welcome anyone else's input in terms of, and it's time to really start planning in terms of, you know, the next advisory council meeting. So yeah, we welcome it. Okay. Ingrid, did you have something? Yeah.
Yes, I just wanted to say, I don't want to lose what you mentioned about waste family time. I think we need to, as partners and as leadership team, to really laser focus on that statement, because we do not want the families that are part of this, that are essential, to feel that they're wasting their time. So I'm taking that statement and saying, okay, why is that happening? Why is the feeling? What is the, so let's explore that together and begin to develop some actions in which what it seems to me that we have, what the concept is, silos of excellence. You know, the silos of excellence, we're doing fantastic work separately. So somebody said the links, the connections. And sometimes it's not just about communication. It's really about coming together and listen. That's part of communication too, but it's more about, sometimes you say, oh, you send an email, but that's not what it is. You see, it's just like how strategic we are about really, so there is no time wasted, especially from our families. So anything that I can do to help, please let me know. I know I've been absent for many of the meetings, but when I hear statements like this, it's just like, we need to make sure that that is not happening. And, you know, I'm taking ownership of that as well as a member of the partners. How do we ensure that that does not take place? You know, we just want to bring it together.
So I wonder if one of the questions is there something leadership should be asking the advisory council? I don't know what it is, but we have them as an advisory council for a reason, right? So what do we want their advice on? What do we want their input? And one of the things I think, so I'm a mandated member of the SAC for the State Advisory Council. And so it's an advisory council that's 50% parents, and it is actually parent run. The parent is the chair. And so I think it's a really good model, but they have work groups also, but the state gives us very targeted questions for those groups to explore together, and then we get their feedback. So for example, because it's all disability related, you know, what are your experiences, whether you work for DDS or you're a parent or whoever you are, related to LRE for students with disabilities? What are the pros and cons? What do people think about LRE? And then the discussion ensues. And then by the purpose of the advisory council is to give advice to the legislature. That's actually who the advising body that receives it. So what are we asking? Like, what do we have that's an issue that we might want to make an ask of the legislature? So I guess I put that on this advisory council, saying they're advising us, right? So we're the recipients of their input. So what input do we need? What input do they want to provide? I think we have to ask them that, you know?
So Jane, I was curious if that's because I've been thinking this, and I think you pointed to kind of what's happening is there seems to be two separate tracks related to almost like strategic planning, right? So we have us looking at long-term goals, et cetera, and then you have these innovative work groups, et cetera, formulating their own kind of plans and goals to kick to us. So it seems to me that what needs to happen, and it's kind of been happening almost like organically on its own, but I think it needs to happen with intentionality and clarity and communication, that they are informed and brought in for advising on the long-term goals and the adoption of long-term goals and how work plans get formulated within the partner organizations, so that the partner organizations are prepared to speak on about their work plans to advisory and get feedback and kind of guidance and direction, et cetera, as they relate to Dave's logic model, as they relate to long-term goals, right? So I think to me, it's almost like there's the disconnect, right? And I don't want to keep repeating myself, but I would just put that on the table for this group to consider.
So once I think you're right, Francisco. I mean, I think that's what we're kind of getting to, right? I mean, the whole idea. Can you hear me now? I'm sorry. Can you hear me now? Yeah. So we have 15 more minutes. We've had really good discussion around this, and the 15 minutes now, what I would share, and I think probably what we need is more time to look at the long-term goals. So let me just share my screen if I can get back to it. Let's see. Sharing, right? So this is, this was, and I think that probably we're not going to have enough time to go over all of the stuff, and we probably will need some, what I would like is maybe people to react to this. But I looked at the work that was done in both working groups this past time when we were together. And so we looked at the 3 different buckets. We did not look at the time at the advisory council. So that was kind of a separate, goal. The 3 that we looked at were capacity in the schools, capacity for parents. Then this is of course our 3 big buckets in terms of the work that we need to do for actually our grant. So how we do this can change. We certainly have that ability, and we can modify this. But the big kind of goals of our work do not change according to our grant. So the first one is really in schools. And when the 2 working groups got together, these were the 2. The first one, I believe, this is the one that I think Judy. I didn't put all the little details in here, but this is the first one that came up. So this was certainly established, sustain and bring family engagement practice and policy into action by building full, equal, and equitable partnerships with, we identified the amount of districts. So Jane, that was one of your questions. Are we expanding how many districts that we're working with? And that would be expanding to at least 2 districts, from 5 to 7 districts, with an intentional focus on equity, attention to English language learners, and students with special needs. And that would happen by 2023. So the end of the grant. This is a very large one. I mean, it extends to the end of the grant. The other group looked at, and this was something that came from the other group, and so is to build robust partnerships among families, schools, and community by changing the way that we think about family engagement, valuing parent and student voice as an essential strategy for success. This will be accomplished by focusing on high-impact family engagement practice with Alliance school districts. So we don't have to react to these, but these were 2 different. And I don't know, Francisco, you worked on, and Dave, and I think who else worked on? Number 1 was kind of the top one was the one that you worked on, I think, Francisco, right?
My group did all three. We did a goal for all three, and it was Christine, Dave, and Yukio.
Right, right, but I think that for this one, this is the one that you worked on. Right, for this particular goal. This should represent some of the work that I took it from what the Google Doc was.
Yeah, if I'm reading that correctly, we did both of those. Those kind of look like.
Oh, the second one too? The second one came from the second group.
No, that text comes from the document I sent you on the top. But so, I mean, it might be that we were just had a brain sync and we were writing the same stuff.
Sure. But
yeah, my group wrote, looks like both those. And we had some like steps in there and focus on intentionality of equity lens and et cetera. Right.
So my question is, are we tied to this right now because the equity definition here is limited as compared to when we meet with parents, whether it's in the advisory group or within our subcommittees, their explanation and their challenge around equity is broader than this. And so do we need to adjust because of what the parents are telling us?
sure. And we may need to. I mean, these are just statements that people came up with again. I'm going to share the next one. So just think, and we'll send these out to people in terms of Google Docs so they can look at this. The intention is that we would have one around capacity for school districts. And this is the second one with families. So we did not identify that, but this one is build the capacity of, we didn't identify how many families, to experience full, equal, and equitable partnerships with their children's schools. It will target parents from Connecticut's 5 largest cities or Alliance school districts that do not have parent leadership training or are underserved communities. And it was from one of the groups. The second statement from the same goal from the second group is build the capacity of parents through professional development and leadership opportunities to have equal voice about policy, practice, and advocacy to determine how to meet the social, emotional, and academic needs of their children. Erase the term hard to reach and explain why. And then the last one, and I think we spent a lot of time, Jane, on this one in our group, Jane and Donna, and this was really looking at, you know, the hub, the website. And we did decide that there was going to be a name change within our group, right? The resource hub for family engagement will be the go-to site for information, resources, and professional development for families, schools, and community providers. It will build on equal and equitable family engagement practice with an intentional focus on language which is clear. It should read easy to use and include resources that represent diverse perspectives. In this one, we said the success will be measured by metrics that are designed to count the number of users. So can I suggest this? It's 4:24, and we really wanted to get to the long-term goals. Can I suggest, may I suggest that we take a look at these goals and we send them out for folks through Google Docs to really kind of think about what we want in each of these buckets as one goal to represent the work that we're going to do. You know, that will begin that whole strategic, so that will be part of our strategic plan as we move forward.
Betsy,
Yeah.
can
Oh, sorry.
go ahead, Christine, go ahead.
Oh, no. I was just going to say, I was in the group that worked on these, but now that we had the conversation about the values, I'm thinking pretty differently about these. And so I for one, would be happy to take a look at them again, you know, through Google Doc or whatever means, you know, people think would best get the job done.
Would others be willing to work? I would be willing to work with you on that, Christine. Would anyone else like to work on that?
So I have a question, Betsy, and it's more of a process question.
Yes.
These long-term goals are goals that we pull from the grant, or is goals that we design as anchoring for strategic planning moving forward?
Yes.
Yes to which one? Yes to the
yes.
first, or just
well, yes.
just
to
the, okay.
I think originally, Ingrid, this was written in the original grant. You know, it was the long-term goal, and it did anchor our work in terms of these three buckets. But as we are moving into year 3 of our work, we really decided that, you know, number one, we needed to put some numbers around it and really be a little more, you know, be a little more intentional about not only what we're doing, but then really then think about what the, you know, look at the outcomes, which Dave has started to do with some of the work plans. So I think we're open to looking at each of these. I think the buckets probably don't change, Ingrid, but the way that we define them can change. Does that make sense?
So Betsy, so I hear you saying that the buckets won't change, but one of the things that I'm noticing as I'm looking at this again is that I don't know that I would call the resource hub and marketing a goal. I think it's a strategy.
Okay.
Maybe more around, you know, related to building, you know, family capacity, and it could be around, depending on what we're providing, around even building school district capacity. So, you know.
So Christine, you are asking, you are aiming to the question that I was going to ask too.
Yeah.
Because for me, I was actually going to say, Dave. So it's just like, I feel like two things. There is almost, what is it that we are trying to measure, to accomplish, that is tangible data points that are linked to the strategic plan for the grant? And what are the strategies in order to be able to meet what we said we're going to measure? So that's what I was struggling a little bit with. What are we trying to accomplish? So maybe Dave, I don't know, maybe you're, yeah, I'm just.
Yeah, I actually need to leave, but I would say that probably the 3 areas, and again, you're right, I think, Christine, it's just that that's the RFP for are these 3 big buckets. So I think having it might not really be a goal, but, it is how we're probably you need to report out. So that's, there's kind of that. But in terms of, I think in terms of the details, getting to something which, can be measurable down the road will be helpful, obviously. But I need to run, so I'm sorry. But I'm happy to help if you assign me. Okay. Bye.
Perfect. Great. I think everyone is probably in that position. One of the things that I wanted so our next meeting, I hate to kind of just bring this close to this, but our next meeting is March 4th, and if people could just really, if people could respond to some of these, the work that we do on these goals, and again, the major pieces that we're looking at. I know Christine, Betsy, Dave, if anyone else really wants to, if anyone else would love to have people help work on this. So we'll bring some of this work back at the March 4th meeting. And what I do want to stress is it was wonderful to hear all the kinds of partnership activities that are happening, and that are happening not only that link to family engagement, but also the work that's happening on behalf of the grant. And so any of those trainings or different work that's happening, please send it to us so that we can not only put it on the CF, our new hub, our website, so that we can begin to kind of drive and have a linkage with the work that we're doing amongst each other. So that's been a, I think that's been a real a goal of all of us, and we're really starting to see it today. And I want to make sure that that happens. And then the last piece that I would say, because I know everyone has to leave, is that I did want to announce that Dana Little, who worked with us and developed our CFSP website in terms of structure, has taken another position at CREC. And so we will be conducting interviews for a family engagement website coordinator. We're very excited. I've been given the approval from USDOE and our grant to extend this to a full-time position. So we'll be posting that position. I'm going to send it to our partners, to directors today. And if you have any additions or comments on it, please let me know by Monday, because I would like to post it Monday and start to actually, begin to interview, or the process for putting somebody else on our CFSP team. We would also welcome directors or others to be on the interviewing committee. So please let me know if that's something that you would like to do, and that should happen within a short period of time. I can certainly make you aware of the process and where we are and dates. So if there's I think we're at our 3 minutes over, 2 minutes over, but are there any last minute comments or questions? So we had a lot on this plate. I thought we were gonna kind of move through this. I should have known these are pretty big kinds of questions that we're dealing with. So March 4th is our next leadership meeting. Would anyone like to offer to lead the March 4th meeting? Our leaders, our partners.
That if maybe we do it at rotation, Betsy, if that is the plan. So maybe you can do the dates and we can sign on a date that we feel that we can facilitate the meeting, so that our time is already committed. So that's just a suggestion. If that's the way that you would like to move forward for the facilitation, it would be a great way to know ahead of time.
Okay, so I will submit, I think it's the first Thursday. I think we kind of decided on the first Thursday. So I'll send that out at 3 o'clock to 4:30. I'll send that out, but I think that's perhaps we can rotate in terms of what we do as far as sharing our comments on our committee. I love the idea of us working together on different initiatives and just being involved. So did I hear, Ingrid, that you were going to check your calendar? I hate to voluntold. March 4th, perhaps.
Yeah, I'm open to checking the calendar and see, but I'm suggesting also maybe to send us, like when that we would like to.
Okay.
It's almost like you're asking to all of us to actually facilitate a meeting and have us select the meeting that we want to facilitate. So now it's going to be one of our responsibilities. So we don't, the silent is now like there. So who wants to volunteer? Like, no, you have to do it.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
People on the spot, right?
Exactly. So that's
Okay. Sure, I'll send that out. And then I think that there were several things that we talked about as far as, you know, and things that we want on the calendar and on the agenda for the 4th. So I'll send that out in that short. And then again, if people, as I said, are not only the position, if you know someone who might be interested in this position, we're, you know, we're very excited about it. And if people, again, leaders would like to, anyone on the leadership team would like to be on the interview committee, we would certainly welcome that too. So I just want to say, if there are any other comments, I want to thank Yukio. I want to, actually everyone. It was a great meeting, a lot of good discussion, a lot of work to be done as we move forward. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Good to see you all. Take care.
Take care, everybody.